Virginia, Maryland, all over. If you happen to be able to rename yourself and sort of, if you are a legacy alumni of a program, maybe just put that program name. And if you're just a good friend, trainer, supporter, maybe put that next to your name as well, so that we can kind of get a sense of who's in the room. That would be great. Nice. Yeah, so we have recently finished up some virtual youth programs, and some of those people have joined us, so I want to welcome you. And today our featured speaker is Tommy Lee. Tommy Lee, I will introduce in a moment. Our format for today is we start off with some introductions, and then Tommy Lee will be giving his presentation, followed by questions, discussions, interactions. So feel free at any time to just light up your screen and start talking when it's open discussion time, or raise your hand, or write something in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. But I will start by just introducing Tommy Lee a bit to everyone. So Tommy Lee, I have known since he's been a teenager, and I'm really very privileged to know Tommy and to see who he has grown up to be and the impact he's having on the world. He's passionate about global health, human rights, and youth development, particularly among sexual orientation and gender identity diverse people. His passionate interest for solving global issues has been greatly shaped by, in his words, over a decade-long connection to Legacy International and the Global Youth Village, both as a participant and a staff member. Currently, Tommy works as the academic program administrator for the Department of Global Health at Boston University School of Public Health, overseeing educational and extracurricular activities. He serves as both the inaugural vice chair of the university-wide LGBTQIA+ identified faculty and staff network, and the founding co-chair of the Global Health Department's Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Justice Committee. Tommy earned his Master's of Public Health degree from Boston University in 2018, focusing on global health, program management, and sex and sexuality and gender studies. Concurrently, he completed a graduate level practicum in Botswana with LUSIMBO, Lesbians, Gays, and Bisexuals of Botswana, and earned a graduate certificate in African Studies. He undertook additional graduate level coursework around religion and conflict transformation with the BU School of Theology in 2019. Prior to moving to Boston, Tommy served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Mozambique, first as a community health promoter, and later as the National Gender and HIV Coordinator. He then served as a Peace Corps response volunteer in Guyana, working with the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination and the Guyana Equality Forum. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Conflict Analysis and Resolution from George Mason University as well. So this is a man who puts his knowledge to action. So I want to welcome him today. And I want to turn it over to Mr. Rash.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to see you all again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to some new friends to Legacy International's Global Viewpoints Forum, creating a new tomorrow today. Every day, the future is created, but as we realize, it's lived in the present. And today, like every day, is filled with challenges and opportunities. Some obviously self-created, others seemingly foisted upon us by other forces, fate, or circumstance. One thing that's obvious is that it takes leadership and vision, selfless action and compassion, empathy and love for our fellow human beings, for all life, to change circumstances. And that leadership is often inspired by others, great souls who have come before us, who have shown us the path to creating a vision and a practical means for fulfilling that vision. 13 days ago, our dear friend, the co-chairman of Legacy International's Board of International Advisors, and a soul and heart brother of mine for over 35 years, Dr. Harold Robles, passed from this world. among people. He served humanity for over 4 decades, a disciple of Albert Schweitzer, the Nobel Peace Laureate physician famous for his work in Africa and Lambaréne, humanitarian. Harold walked in Schweitzer's shoes and filled them. He too was a recognized humanitarian. He created the Albert Schweitzer Institute, the Medical Knowledge Institute, and finally, the Health Promotion South African Trust. Teaching, training, serving in all the townships in South Africa, working day and night tirelessly to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS in women and children, providing leadership training, health promotion, jobs for women, serving disenfranchised youth and orphans and former gang members. Harold worked untiringly for decades, spreading Dr. Schweitzer's message of reverence for life throughout the world, which is the title of one of Harold's books, which I will show you. His 2 books, Reverence for Life and Schweitzer Adventure for Humanity. You can get this from Maurice Bassett Publications. Ilona and Maurice may be on today from Holland, I'm not sure. Harold, as Schweitzer did, raise funds on his trips to Europe to support his mission. In his younger days, he ran the Schweitzer Hospital in Lambaréne with Dr. Schweitzer's daughter for almost a decade. He then went on to serve and train health professionals in South Africa. And it's with such sadness and regret that he was, as he said, taken home, in our opinion, much too soon. He worked with Legacy International's Community Health Initiative. He was on our board of advisors. Enthusiastic, infectious, and optimism. When Harold entered the room, the lights became brighter. Everyone left with hope, and love overflowed from our hearts. Everyone tasted the sweetness of gratitude and humility that pervaded the atmosphere. And Harold was honored in 2016 by President Obama. He worked with world leaders and human rights activists, including Desmond Tutu, who, by the way, called him a few times before his passing. He worked with Nelson Mandela, with Jimmy Carter, with Bill Clinton, and Mikhail Gorbachev. He was the Goodwill Ambassador of the Ethnic Businesswoman Society of the Netherlands, was knighted by the Queen of the Netherlands, and so many more honors. And Harold, secretly under the cover of night, took children out of Bosnia during the war, actually adopting one of those children. It just walking in front of a bus. He exposed organ harvesting of orphans in another country. Oh, there were so many stories about him. He saw public health as a spiritual imperative as well as a social necessity. And he showed how vast the field of public health is, how deep the love of humanity can be, and how profound the effect is on the lives of individuals. Harold was the epitome of Legacy International's view of the world and mission, truly a member of our family. So it is so fitting today that today we're hearing from someone who serves humanity, a young man who we first met as a participant in the Global Youth Village, who has gone on to become a new light in public health and also the essential core of all service to humanity, the spiritual inner path for awakening human beings to their potential and fulfilling dreams of a better, more equitable and tolerant world. Tommy Lee is such a person, and he can fill the shoes of people like Harold. From manifest in our outer, we have learned that humility comes from gratitude, and with that, our natural propensity for empathy emerges. In my study over the decades and travel throughout the world, especially my time in India, and with truly saintly people there in and from the Middle East, I have come to realize that I strive to help others to see how truly all life and all existence is interconnected. To understand that we are all stewards of this planet and citizens of vast universes. There is a trust that we have inherited, and we have a fiduciary and an ethical and moral responsibility to manage that trust. There is a saying in the Middle East that when a soul passes from this world, a new star is born. Well, 13 days ago, not a star, but as Yasmin Robles, Harold's wife, describes him, a supernova was created. Today I want to honor as Allah would have it, the first person to speak of our forum after Harold's passing, Tommy Lee. I know that he would be delighted to know that Tommy was speaking. A wonderful start in the making, who inshallah, in creating a new light, who inshallah will live and work for many decades, serving humanity, inspiring others. And I want to invite Tommy to fill the empty space on Legacy International's Board of Advisors left by Harold. Albert Schweitzer wrote, "The more we act in accordance with the principle of reverence for life, the more we are gripped by the desire to preserve and benefit life. The principle of reverence for life includes an elemental sense of responsibility to which we must submit with all of our being. There are forces active within that principle which cause us to refine our individual, social attitudes, a fitting message for today's world for all of us. My apologies for taking so much time, but I felt that Harold and Tommy, brought together under these circumstances, deserve this attention. Thank you, Tommy, for joining us today."
Thank you very much, Mr. Rash, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the introduction, and I only wish I had had a chance to meet him. Sounds like a remarkable man. And I want to go ahead and thank Legacy International, Mary, Jason, for this opportunity to speak to you all today. And it's great to see some familiar faces and to meet some new faces as well. Hi, Sabrine. Hi, Sama. Special shout outs. And I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll share my screen with you all. Can we all see this? Yeah. So as someone who works in higher education at a university, I'm honestly a bit tired of Zoom, so I really do appreciate you all taking an extra time out of your day to electively be here. I really do appreciate that, and hopefully we can, you know, learn from each other today. And this is really meant to be a dialogue. And so feel free to either use the chat or interrupt me at any time to ask questions and to really help me also to improve this presentation and this thought process. I'll just say that when given the opportunity to speak about something today, I chose this topic, which is something I've thought about a lot, but have yet to actually put into concrete terms or into a presentation or really to write much about. And so I thought this would be a great catalyst to force me to actually put it into something. And it's also something that I think is extremely relevant to 2020 and all that 2020 has presented to us. So the theme is practicing humility, empathy, and interconnectedness in global public health. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. But I do want to start with just introducing myself and giving a little bit of context. So as you can see from this photo, also from just looking at me, I want to make it very clear and put out there my identities, that this experience, this presentation is coming from a place of my own lived experiences. And so I am a white person, I'm male, I'm American, I have a college degree, all of these things that are privileges and opportunities that were given to me and that I had throughout my life. And so I want to be very much aware and cognizant that this presentation is coming from that place. And so I welcome you to challenge me at any point and to help me in my own understanding and growth. I'll also say that one identity that I do affiliate with that has had a really profound impact on my life and is sort of my salient identity, meaning that it's the one that seems to impact me the most, is I identify as gay and as a member of the LGBT community. And so that one specifically has really shown me throughout life what it feels like to be marginalized, what it feels like to be oppressed or, stereotyped against. And it's something that I've really tried to dedicate my work to focusing on. And just to put that into context, I put up some quotes. So when a few years ago, when I was applying for graduate school. And I'll also mention I'm 29, so this is a relatively young experience. I would certainly say it's not a fully formed experience or thought, but it's something that I'm working on. And so a few years ago when I was applying to school, in my statement I wrote about belonging to this community has a profound impact on my life and draws me to the weight social identity carries in public health. And I still think that's very true. I think public health and global health is very much centered around the identities that we affiliate with, both how we see and perceive our own identities, but also how others see and perceive those identities. Identities have a strong effect on how we view ourselves, as well as how others see us. And therefore, they can be catalysts for things like inequality, poor health, and a lack of social cohesion. And then lastly, I wrote that, parallel to my growth as a global health scholar, in this presentation, I'm speaking about public health, but I think these topics could be applied to any field. They're really human topics, not necessarily health topics. But as I was growing and learning more about health, I was constantly growing and learning more about myself and who I was and what my identity meant to me. And so for me, they're very hard to separate, and that's why I use health as sort of my context and framework. But I've overcome my own self-doubt, stigma from others, harmful societal influences and ideas to understand a more true idea or revelation of who I am. And it's really funny, one of the things I wrote in that statement was, I'm a healthier person today because I'm conscious of my significance. And it seems like a contradiction to a presentation that starts off with humility. But I'm going to challenge myself to expand on what exactly it was I meant when I said conscious of my significance, and the idea that I don't think humility needs to be different than pride. I think you're allowed to be proud of who you are. You can have self-esteem and confidence, but there's a way to do that humbly. So the reason I'm talking about humility, empathy, interconnectedness, what are these things? Really, I just want to tell some stories today about experiences I've had, things I've learned about, moments in my life where something really clicked. So it was this aha moment where a light bulb went off, but also my heart sank a little bit, my stomach tightened up, and it was this realization, and everything that I had thought before, my way of thinking, my philosophy, almost seemed to change in an instant. And so I've decided to call these phenomena, if you will, and this is sort of a broadly accepted definition of what a phenomena is, but I choose that word because I realized something in that moment and it was remarkable. And it might be because of somebody else, a really amazing person I met, a really amazing experience that I had. And they were phenomenal, and they completely reshaped my thought and philosophy on life and also on health. So I will admit that, being a public health person, I'm trying to create a framework. I'm trying to categorize these phenomena, which maybe isn't necessary at all, but I'm going to do it because that's what I do in health. And I would say that in life, these phenomena, as I call them, generally speaking, I thought there were 3 groups that were similar experiences. And so then I tried to name these 3 groups, and I came up with humility, empathy, and interconnectedness. I think, and I really challenge you as you listen to me today, to relate to what I'm saying, to think about how those experiences might be true for you, and also to acknowledge that maybe you would call them something completely different. Maybe those aren't the words you would use, and that's okay. I'm not even convinced they're the words I want to use, but that's what I'm going to do because this is a public health framework I'm trying to work on. So breaking it into, again, humility, empathy, and interconnectedness, and my framework is thinking about global public health. So humility, and again, feel free to stop me at any time if you need to, but humility, this is not my definition. This is sort of a very standard definition of humility, and it's interesting. It's a modest or low view of one's own importance and humbleness. And I think a lot of people would think a low view of your own importance, like that doesn't seem like something you should have. especially when I wrote earlier that I was conscious of my significance. But what I've really come to experience in life through some stories is that it's really good to be humble, and it's good to feel small. And I'll start with one story, and this is probably the only frame that I have that is going to be very health focused and very sort of theoretical and school-like. But in public health, we learn about the social ecological model of health and this idea of social determinants that happen throughout the life course. And so in public health, you know, a lot of people assume your health is a result of something medical or clinical. It's either you had this disease, you caught this virus, maybe you did a really unsafe behavior. It's all this thought that those are the only things that cause unhealthiness. But we know that's not true. That we know that there are many other causes of unhealthiness, from things around you in society, the environment you live in, how safe your community is, your relationship to other people, your relationship to your family, the opportunities you have, what school you went to, what zip code you were born into, what country you're from. All of these things are social things that have direct impacts on your health. And they change throughout the life course. So the impacts they have on a child might be different than the impacts they have on an adult. And I'm particularly, because of my age and experience and people I work with, very much focused and thinking about adolescence. So when you're really trying to figure out who you are, really trying to rely so much on other people's opinions and perceptions and what kind of impact that has on you. And so these are just what those two frameworks sort of look like. You know, social determinants, they can be your family, your friends, but it's also big things. It's laws, it's policies, it's, does your government allow you the right to get married? Does the government allow you the right to access equal healthcare? You know, interpersonal relationships could also be your relationship to a healthcare provider. Does your doctor hold some sort of bias or prejudice towards you that impacts your health? And so that's sort of what it looks like in a health framework. And so after learning that in grad school and looking at statistics about an identity group that I belong to, what I started to realize was these are statistics I had seen throughout my life. You know, they weren't necessarily new to me, but all of a sudden understanding that framework, it hit differently. And I was really frozen in my tracks. So I read something like, you know, 24% of LGBT youth can feel like they can be themselves at home. That means only a quarter of LGBT youth feel like they can be themselves in their home, which should be a very safe place. Before, I would have probably said, you know, that's awful, that's sad, we should do something about it. But understanding life course and understanding social determinants, I realized that at any point in my life, something different could have happened, and that could have been me. I could have been that 1 in 4. You know, I could have been that statistic. And it's not anything that I did, it's not a choice I made. It's completely based on what opportunities I had, what schools I went to, how many friends I had, and the way people reacted when I came out. And so this is really humbling in the sense that you realize in some cases you are a degree of separation away. You're one sort of fork in the road away from being a statistic. And all of a sudden the statistics sort of came off the paper. They were human. I saw the people, I saw myself in the data, I saw myself in the numbers. And I constantly see that, you know, if that would have been me, maybe I would have been one of the LGBT youth who contemplated or attempted suicide. Maybe I wouldn't be here today in a blazer, able to give you a presentation. And some of those things are relationships. Some of them might be if I had been born in a different country, if I had been born a different skin color, if I had been born a different sex, if I had been born 10, 15, 20 years earlier, my life would be completely different and I would have had no control over that. And so you sense this feeling of gratitude for the things you have, but it's very humbling to know and to remind yourself not to become too distant or too removed from data and statistics. And I use LGBT as an example, but I find it true in most statistics and data. And hearing about things, you know, that are happening today, you see a number and thinking of it more than just a number. It's a story, it's a human, it's a life. And so in a life course, I sort of made a mention of forks in the road. And so one way to think of life course is in your life, you're walking down the road and you're constantly coming up to a fork or a way where your life can go in a different direction. Sometimes it might be a choice. You know, sometimes you choose to go left or right. Most of the time, with social determinants, that's not the case at all. What you're doing most of the time is someone else has complete control of which way you go. So as a gay person, when I come out to somebody, their reaction and how they treat me can dictate which way my life goes. For other people, it might be an interaction with a police officer that dictates which way your life goes. It might be interaction with a partner or a spouse or you know, an older adult if you're a child. It might also be completely institutional and government. So you come to a fork in the road, and because of who you are, because of your identity, there's a law or there's some sort of practice in place that doesn't even allow you to access the left direction. And so you're forced to go right. And when you think of that and you realize that throughout life, your life could have gone very differently based on a number of factors and based on identities. And so to put that into context, again, this idea of coming out is a story that I'll tell with my mom. So as gay people, we do this thing called coming out, which means our identity is not usually a visible identity. Most of the time, you shouldn't be able to look at somebody and know what their sexual orientation is. So we come out to people. And I always thought as a young person that when I finally did this, it would be, you know, the movies, like Love, Simon. I thought I was gonna come out on a Ferris wheel, I'd have a partner, it would be a big proclamation, I would be proud, I'd be confident, I'd be ready. And that was not the case at all. I was pretty much, my mom knew, and she had found out through another way, and gave me the opportunity to sat me down and talk to me and said, you know, I think there's something that you've been wanting to tell me, and you know, I really want you to tell me what it is. And complete opposite of everything I want it to be, I have never felt smaller, I've never felt more shriveled up, scared. And I knew, you know, not because I was afraid of my mother, but I knew from media, from other stories, from other people's experiences, from the statistics like that you saw on the last slide, that it could have gone really bad. It could have been, in an instant, someone else's reaction would have completely dictated the future of my life. And this was 10 years ago this year. So I'm trying to think, even now, imagining how different that last decade could have been. And I was so small, I was crying, and I basically just whimpered. I barely was able to spit it out that I was gay. And I wrote about it a few years later, and I wrote that my mother met me with compassion and love, but understanding would take time. She told me that, please know I love you very much. You've had time to accept this and process it, but for me, this is the beginning. And in that moment, what was most important was her reassurance and acceptance that I was loved and I would be okay, and that everything else we could work to figure out together. And what that did was, it was very humbling in the sense that she put it on me. She said, you have struggled with this for 4, 5, 6+ years of your life, and thinking about this and processing this. And I'm asking you, knowing that I love you, I'm asking you that this is for me day one. And that was really an amazing experience to be received well, but also to understand that I now had a responsibility to work with her and to, help her to get through the process as well. And our relationship is so much better now because of it. And so that first phenomenon I kind of categorize as humbleness and this idea of humility. And it's okay to feel small, because that's really where a lot of growth happens. And I'll sort of expand more on humbleness in a second through the other two phenomenon, but I will pause just for a second to see if there's any questions on the first phenomena. Alrighty, so moving on, let me share the screen again. So empathy is Of the three, this is the one I'm least confident in defining. I think mostly because this year I have seen the word empathy used a lot, and I think it is misused quite a bit. And we're going to talk at the end in a discussion about how these things apply to 2020. But as someone who is involved in and does work with diversity and inclusion, I think empathy is sometimes misunderstood to try to co-opt or share someone's experience. And the idea here is not sharing somebody's experience. The idea is that you're able to understand it and then maybe share the feelings that are associated with it. And so for me, there was a number of times in my life when I realized and experienced this idea of empathy. The first was in Mozambique. So I spent most of my time there dedicated to two populations. The first was adolescent girls, so teenage girls that were 15 to 20, and then the other group I worked with a lot was people living with HIV, who were peer activists and community educators. And both of these populations, what really excited me the most was the work they were doing was identity-based work. So all of the girls groups were doing gender equality, women's health, girls empowerment. So everything they did from an activist and community standpoint was centered around an identity they had. The same was true for the people living with HIV. So they were doing HIV prevention work, they were doing counseling for people who were living with HIV, they were doing work to eliminate stigma against people living with HIV. And I was so moved. I was an outsider, and I'm not a girl, and I don't have HIV, but I was able to relate to this idea of what it felt like to be pushed aside, to be seen as less than, to be marginalized in a community, and to want to do something about it. And so as an outsider, I was able to support them. But what I really wanted to do, and what I thought I needed to do, was I should focus on work related to an identity I have. And so I wanted to go after Mozambique and focus on LGBT health. And I wrote about this experience that although I was an outsider, I empathized deeply and cherished my time working with these young women, health activists, and the allies who directly engaged in the work to alleviate the harmful effects of community exclusion. They took action and ownership to improve their lives and campaigned for the right to exist in a more just society. The dedication and passion displayed by these groups to be stewards of their health and change makers for the community motivated me to do the same. And so after Mozambique, I went to Guyana, worked on LGBT rights. Grad school, I thought my entire thing was going to be LGBT health, and that was going to be my focus. And it was what I focused on a lot. In my very last semester, I was in a course, and we had to do an assignment called a key informant interview. So essentially you spend time at length interviewing somebody who is an expert in your field or who is really impacted by the work you're doing. And my topic was around LGBT activism and health. And I connected with Richard LUSIMBO, who I had met once before. And Richard is Ugandan. So he's from Uganda, and he's out in Uganda as a gay man and an activist. And I spent quite a lot of time talking to him about the work he was doing and all of his thoughts on what the biggest challenges were, what are success stories, what should we be doing, what should we mimic here in the United States. And I'm listening to his story, and I am not Ugandan, obviously. But because of our shared identity, I was able to really empathize with his story, not nearly on the same scale. I don't know what it feels like to be persecuted in a country where there's so much hate and intolerance towards that community on a scale much larger than our own country. But I could still relate to and know what it felt like to be marginalized and to listen to his story in a very empathetic way. And even though we look different, I see Richard and I saw a lot of myself, a lot of the same passions, a lot of the same interests, same style, even a little bit. And so we were able to connect that way. What really struck out to me was at the end of the interview, I asked him my very last question, what do we need to do next? What is the most important thing that we should be doing as people focused on LGBT rights? And his answer was one of those moments I'm talking about where you just stop in your tracks and everything you thought you knew is completely changed in an instant. And his answer to me was that he wanted to open a bigger dialogue with Uganda about why rights for LGBT people are important. He said change must come from within a society and we must have a serious conversation. And then he said to rally your partners, it's important to ask who else is a part of this conversation or struggle and invite them to the table. And the part that really got me was to identify with and support other human rights causes, including women, including children, including the rights of those who are disabled, including people from other countries. Transformation of a society means you have to be a part of other people's causes. And what really struck to me was all that work I had done before, focusing on, girls' empowerment or people living with HIV and AIDS, was not a separate thing. These movements, these ideas of human rights, they're universal. And when we fight for something like equality, when we fight for liberation, it has impacts on everybody as a whole. Even though we might be focusing at certain times on certain groups of people, we need to show up and support one another, because when African Americans have more rights, gay people will have more rights, women will have more rights, it is cyclical and it's interconnected. And that completely just sort of shook my mind that I don't need to only focus on LGBT human rights and health. As long as I'm focusing on human rights, as long as I'm focusing on being a decent, compassionate person, that will have implications in multiple ways. And so I really was appreciative of Richard and that lesson that he taught me. And the other time, and this was the last one for empathy, that really struck out to me and made me really think deeply about humanity and spirituality. I don't mention it much, but I grew up as a religious person. A lot of what I talk about has, I think, hints of spirituality in it. But I remember very vividly on the idea of empathy. In 2016, there was the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. And so in 2016, at a nightclub, a gay nightclub, which if you're a member of the community or if you've ever been to one, for us, it is not just about socializing and dancing. It is a safe space where you can be yourself. You're fully out. You are living a truest form of who you are. And a lot of those worries about the outside world, about stigma, about discrimination you might be facing, it's out there. And for a moment, you can sort of let go and be yourself. And in a sort of weird way, it is a spiritual place to be. And so the idea to have somebody come into that space and bring in such much hate and to bring in so much violence really resonated with me. And even though I'm not from Orlando, I'm not from Florida, I was not at that nightclub, I knew exactly what it felt like to be in one. And thinking of the life course, that shooting could have happened anywhere in the United States, and it could have been much different outcome. And I saw pictures of people who are like me, mourning and grieving, and I related, and it struck me, and I was able to really empathize. A few years later, in 2019, you have the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand. And this is when a white supremacist went into a number of mosques in Christchurch and brought in an unimaginable degree of violence and hate and took the lives of another people who identify as Muslim. And the reaction I had to that shooting was the exact same reaction, the exact same grief I had to Orlando. And that's when I really understood that this idea of empathy can be applied in multiple ways. And it struck me that, a mosque is a place of worship. It's where I imagine you go to be yourself, the truest version of yourself, to connect to a higher being, to for a moment escape from the outside world, to not bring in that hate and discrimination. There were so many parallels, and that somebody who could come in and bring in so much hate, I had the same reaction, the same amount of grief. And I saw pictures of people mourning and grieving, and I related to them. Even though I did not have the same identity, I understood the experience. And so that's sort of where I'm at with empathy and the idea of empathy. I'll finish with interconnectedness, which for me, I don't know if it's the third one or if it's the overarching one, maybe like an umbrella, but very simply, it's this idea that we're all connected to one another. This, I think, is true in what I said earlier, that our entire health is dependent on all these systems and the way other people treat you. That's a very physical, literal, practical version. If you're spiritual, or if you sort of feel like you're connected to a larger power or universality, it's this idea that maybe our souls are collective, our understanding is collective, this idea of humanity, it's all sort of a oneness, and that no matter how, you're all connected to one another. And I learned this in a number of ways, but specifically I want to talk about 2018. I went to Botswana and I was doing work with an LGBT organization, and one of their values that the entire organization is built around is called Botho, which is like a cultural value in Botswana. And what Botho means, it's derived from a word Motho, which is human being. And the phrase translates to, you are who you are because of the people around you. I am because you are. And all of a sudden that just completely took everything I had been thinking of and trying to put into words. And I was so ecstatic to learn that a word already existed from a different culture. And I don't want to appropriate the culture, but I really do understand and respect. And I'm grateful for the time I was spent there learning more about what this word means and how it's used to convince people and to change hearts and minds. What was really great about Botswana was I learned from the LGBT activists there that coming out is not only about having people accept you, it's not only about being yourself, it's actually a tool for advocacy and advocacy. And it's this idea that if you come out, you can change people's opinions, you can enact change, you can lobby for changes to laws. And when I was in Botswana, they were lobbying and they were successful in having homosexuality decriminalized in Botswana, which was a huge moment. And so this idea that we have a collective understanding of our interconnected humanness, and that we all share a responsibility to find common ground, to encourage others to be supportive of the rights of all people, and to know that your humanity is rooted in the humanity of others. So if you were the only person in the world, you really wouldn't be a human. You would just be a thing. And that who you are as a person is shaped by everybody that's come before you. It's shaped by everybody who you interact with and live with. It's also shaped by people you will never meet. People in the most remote corners of the world are also human, and we're all interconnected. And so I took that idea of, coming out is a tool. Coming out is a thing you can do to change people's minds. And I went to Global Youth Village that summer. And these are some pictures of Legacy and different projects we were involved in. But we decided I convinced Mary to do a global issues night. And it was going to be, people could sign up for what presentation they wanted to go to. And I really debated about what I would talk about. But I just knew there was something kind of pushing me. You should do LGBT rights. And that was hard because I knew in an instant this relationship that I had built with all these youth. They had respected me, they looked up to me, they enjoyed my time. It could have changed instantly. They could have no longer respected me. They could have thought about me completely different just based on the fact of me telling them something about myself. But I knew it was important. So we did the presentation and the students could select where they wanted to go. So in my presentation, we had a number of students, and I'm giving the presentation talking about statistics and showing some clips. And throughout the presentation, I'm seeing in the audience two sort of reactions. A lot of people, I think, are being humble. They either related to the experience, they knew somebody personally that identified in that way, and they were moved by how sad and somber some of the reality can be. And a lot of them, I think, saw themselves in the presentation. The other half of the room, you could see in their faces and being worked out this idea of empathy. So they didn't identify. They didn't necessarily know somebody, but they could relate to this idea of what it felt like to be seen as different, to be targeted because you're different. And after the presentation, we came back together as all the groups, and students could share what they had learned and what their takeaways were. And the students are amazing. If you've ever been to Global Youth Village, you know. These are the most incredible young adults. But there was one from the UK, his name was Harnaik, and he got up there and he talked about how he had gone to the presentation and that his entire life, he never really knew anybody who was gay. He never thought it was important to think about that. Those were, those people. That doesn't impact me. That doesn't really matter. But he understood and he explained very well that their experiences were so similar to his experiences and the things that he had gone through because of his own identities. And he just put it so eloquently about how it mattered. It mattered to care about other people's experiences, and that, human rights are interconnected and universal. And that was sort of a huge check mark for me. Like, that was the moment I was hoping for and coming out. And then I remember Mr. Rash at the end, always putting the most remarkable sort of final thoughts and words, said that just as importantly as what you do for others, the work you do on yourself is global health, both in a practical and in a mystical way. And I remember thinking about that for the next 24 hours, the rest of summer. I was back at grad school. I constantly came back to this idea. And Mr. Rash is here, so maybe he'll correct me. But my interpretation and what I really appreciated was global health and public health. You think it's always about what you can do for other people or some sort of actionable item. How do you make a community better? How do you make a project better? But just as importantly is taking time to do work on who you are. And the work you do to listen to people, to try and be more empathetic, to try to be humble, the work you do to listen to someone else's story, to put yourself in their shoes, is work that helps global health because it makes you a better practitioner. It makes you a better person, it makes you kinder. And then if you believe that we're all interconnected, that we're sharing this soul, anything you do to make the soul better will benefit everybody. And so I really took this away as sort of a guiding philosophy that sticks with me today and really helps me to understand interconnectedness. And then I'll just say that the next year in 2019, I went back to Global Youth Village and we did what was called Global Faces of Leadership. And I put together a 6-part workshop. And this one was not optional. So the 2018, those students all chose to be at the presentation. And 2019, they had to be there. And so we spent time building a relationship, talking about what health was and public health and human rights. And on day 5, the presentation was LGBT rights. And I was equally as nervous. It never gets easier per se, but I knew it was important. I was optimistic from last year's experience. And I saw again a number of reactions. There was humbleness, there was empathy. There was another reaction in the room where some people were, upset. Some people were angered. Some people chose to leave the presentation. And I knew in that moment that how I handled myself was really important. These are young people. These are people who are having a fork in the road, and how I react and treat them will matter and really help to shape their future. And so I finished the presentation. I keep my composure. And afterwards, one student comes up to me, a young girl, and says that because of the presentation, she was sort of moved and pushed to go pray, which I completely understood. I completely related to. And she said she thought about it a lot and that she felt compelled and pushed to come speak to me. And that even though she had really enjoyed the earlier sessions, she respected me as a teacher, she learned a lot from me, she felt compelled that because of my presentation that day, that I had to know that she hated me, which is never easy to hear, right? That someone telling you they hate you, it's very difficult. And when I heard that, I instantly thought of all those statistics. I thought of my mother, I thought of Richard LUSIMBO, I thought of what it might be like to be gay in the country she came from. I thought about, all of these things and all these people. And then I looked at her again and I saw myself. I saw the same young person who spent so many years struggling to understand this, being told by religion, being told by society that it was somehow wrong, it was bad. And I completely understood where she was coming from. I didn't agree, but I knew that if I could react positively, there might be a chance. And I thanked her. I said, thank you for telling me that. I appreciate you coming to me. I appreciate that you prayed on it. And I just want you to know that I don't hate you. And I hope that, you can learn something from these lessons and think about it some more. And so we parted ways, and I thought about that conversation for the next 24 hours. I was in Mary's office, like, what just happened? And then the next day was the final presentation, and she came back. Some students did not come the last day, which is what it is. But she came, and she sat there attentively the entire time. We sort of just finalized everything, talked about why do human rights matter? What can we do when we go home? And she sat there quietly. And then the presentation was over. I was gonna fly out that afternoon. I was saying goodbye to all the students. And I leave the classroom and she's outside waiting for me. And she says, I've been thinking about this all night. I couldn't sleep. And I want you to know that I'm really sorry for what I said yesterday. And that I don't hate you. I'm just so confused by what you said. But I really don't hate you. And that meant a lot. And for me, what I hope was that moment wasn't about me. I've had enough people in my life respond positively that she wasn't going to change the direction that much. What I hope is that maybe next time when she's back in her country and someone comes after her, she won't react with hate. Maybe she'll react with understanding and trying to find out who it is that person really is, and that we're all interconnected. And so the final thing is that thinking of her, thinking of all of this, I think of myself as a little boy at church trying to make sense of the world, my whole life ahead of me. And there was this hymn that I used to love at church called "Let There Be Peace on Earth." And one of the lyrics, and many people probably know it, it's "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me." And that was my motto as a kid. And that's why I wanted to go into global health and go to GVF and what can I do to make the world a better place? What can I do that's a tangible, actionable item? What am I going to invent? What job am I going to have next? What country am I going to go to next? And what I've learned is that's not at all what that is saying. Let it begin with me is saying to find peace in yourself, to make yourself a more peaceful person, to create and generate peace before you try and go out and make the world any better. You have to start with yourself because we're all interconnected. And so that's where I'll end. And being a public health person, I put together this grid, but it doesn't really mean anything. But if I had to framework this, which I'm not even sure you should, but these are the ideas in summary. There's humility, there's empathy and interconnectedness. And I think each one of these phenomena are presenting a question. So when you see a story, when you read data, when you hear about someone's experience, ask yourself, could that have been me? And afterwards, really challenge yourself not to become distant from the story. Don't be distant from the data. That's not somebody over there. That's another human. That's a person. And to be compassionate enough to open your heart. And then empathy, hearing about someone's story, and every cue, everything tells you that's different. They don't look like you, they don't act like you, that's not your identity, but still being able to see yourself and asking yourself, isn't that me? Isn't that my story also? And to look at someone and recognize yourself and to be wise enough to listen to someone else's story. And then interconnectedness, really asking yourself, who are you? Who am I? Do the work on yourself, get to know yourself better. It's okay to spend time on self-care, on meditation, reflection. And then when you're ready, be courageous enough to tell your story, because hopefully it will have an impact on someone's life. And hopefully it will make the world a better place. And then this is just a way to visualize it. So I don't think they are distinct phenomena. I think they often happen together. You're experienced together. You experience it both internally and it exists around you. You can draw in these things from the outside world. you can also exude these things. And then, of course, there's the work you can do on yourself to make these things better and to learn from other people. So what we're going to do, we'll take questions and discussion, but I want to try and have a discussion where we take all these things and think about 2020. And one thing that I found really striking that I've seen a lot lately, it's if you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And that really struck out to me. And that's sort of been what I'm thinking most about this year as the world grapples with a pandemic, as we grapple with racial inequality and so much hate, so much marginalization, and all that's going on in the world. So I will stop sharing now. And yeah, let's have a discussion. Let's talk. I'm done talking.
I just want to say thank you very much. I think that what COVID has done for all of us is really caused some deep reflection, and that presentation really showed some reflection that you've done over the last decade, but also just for this today. So I want to thank you for taking that time. Does anyone have any comments, questions, reflections? If you do, just go ahead and speak out, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll look for you. Or you can put something in the chat.
I do see stuff in the chat. Yeah, yes, absolutely. There's Ubuntu is very similar linguistically to Botho. So that's from South Africa, another very similar idea culturally.
So one thing that I'm taking away from this, Tommy, so I'll just kind of, is the point about how am I shaping another person's experience? And just really, I think one of the things that I've noticed through a lot of these conversations that we had in the Global Viewpoints Forum is I almost want to create a 5-point checklist for myself this year. And this is now a new question in that list. Like how am my responses, how's my knowledge, how's my ignorance, how are all those things shaping other people's experiences? And what was also interesting to me is that, you know, while we have this mantra of we're all in this together, we're all one, we're all united, there's also this other thing happening, which is highlighting the differences in experience, life experiences, the differences of identity, at bringing out that thought that, you know, I really do need to understand how another person's identity has impacted their life, you know, all those social determinants. So it's kind of an interesting thing to sit with that unity, which is true, we're all human beings, but really dive into how does the identity of another, how am I relating, given my position, to the identity and life experiences of others that I have like no real knowledge of. So anyway, thought-provoking.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to say that, you know, interconnectedness is not uniformity. It is completely acknowledging that we are unity in diversity, and that we are stronger because of the things that make us different. And so I would cautious against any sort of idea that this oneness is colorblind or, you know, negates people's identities. That's absolutely not the case at all. It's being able to see the differences and to appreciate them, and then to also understand that we're all human, but our experience as being human is not all the same.
Tommy, my name's Dan. I'm a Christian pastor, and I just wanted to say how inspirational, you know, your story is, and all the work you've been doing. I appreciated last year getting to hear your talk on how personal health care is global health, you know, is working on global health, and I thought that was really good. And you also quoted from that same hymn, which I love, and it's this whole idea that in the end it begins with me. Whatever I'm whatever I'm doing. And I just loved how you wove that so deeply within those three pieces, and especially humility. And I'm just, just having, in fact, I was in a conversation just before this meeting and another meeting about with a lack of humility, you just can't, you can never find any real change. And then that final quote you just gave us, I mean, that just shows when there's a lack of humility in what we're doing, we'll never be able to grow. And so I just thought how foundational you were setting this up so beautifully. I just wanted to just give you kudos. I don't really have a question. I just thought it was really, really great and very impacting and apropos to a lot of what's happening in the world today, not only in our country, but in just globally. And just appreciate what you're sticking to and you found that works. And I totally agree. I'm sold. So whatever you're packaging here, I'm in. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I also wanted to share something. Hi, Tommy. I was part of your 2019 alumni. As
Yes.
it's really nice to hear you speak again. I think it was really, really interesting in what you spoke about empathy and interconnectedness, and how our differences is what makes us thrive. And it made me reflect on not some experiences of mine, but some experiences that I've witnessed. I went to France. I'm in the UK, as you can hear, and I went to France for a work experience. And they have a law there, a different take on secularism, and you can't wear the hijab in most workplaces that serve the public. And they have it's divided the population. And hearing some experiences from people there, like being fired for praying on lunch breaks, and not being allowed work experiences because they refuse to denounce their expression of religion. It really made me think about that again. And just the words resonated, that our differences is what makes us thrive. And the whole country's take, it just made me think that our whole country's take has got it so messed up and so flawed that it's divided and segregated their population. I just wanted to share that, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. I remember you very well. It's good to see you. Thank you for sharing too.
Hi, Tommy. I
Hi.
loved your presentation. I wanted to share that I myself identify as as a part of the LGBT community, and as a lesbian. And your talk and just like talking about your coming out story made me reflect about coming out to different communities that I'm a part of. And more recently this year, I finally, after years of wanting to, came out to my mother, and that was an experience. I don't have the best relationship with her, but I also grew up in a religious household, so that made it difficult. And just hearing about your perspective from your mother and her response, and how it was the beginning of the journey for her, and how she needed to learn and grow just as I did years ago through my process. And I thought that was like very reflective and meaningful to see a new perspective of that, and to just understand that from a different view. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's very courageous. I'm glad that you did that. And it does take time. You know, I think in hindsight, working with the person, like, again, working on yourself, so your reaction is just as important. And so taking the time to be patient, and then continue to love yourself. I know it's like, if you're in the community, you know, like RuPaul, you can't love yourself. How the hell can you love someone else? So, you know, take the time to work on yourself and make sure you still have that self-love. And that it's hard, especially as a young person, but the older you get, you know, being able to face maybe hate or rejection and still love yourself. And that's what I think is really interesting too, is if you're in the community, there's this idea of pride, and pride is such an important thing. And I don't think it is separate than humility, because our pride is centered around years and years of oppression and all of the challenges we've overcome and all the successes we have had. And our pride is really hard fought. And so pride, I don't mean it in like an arrogant, celebratory kind of way. I mean it in a loving kind of way. And so I think you could be proud and humble. And you should definitely be proud of yourself.
Go ahead, Stella.
Hello, Tammy. Very well presented. Your story is very inspiring. I didn't grow up in this kind of environment where there's a lot of story to be, to be told, or to have someone that is going through it. I've only heard about them or heard discussion from a distance. So you are the closest to me right now in terms of bringing the picture of what the story is really about. So thanks for bringing that identification, like really close to me even having to have an idea of what it feels like when they say, it was difficult for me to come out of the closet. So your story is really inspiring. And I think one lesson that I took out of it was the fact that we all always have to start with our inner self. We have to work on ourselves. We have to first of all build the love within ourselves, so that way, no matter how others relate to you, you can always accept them even if they don't accept you, because that allows you to kind of like, understand where they're coming from, if at all they don't understand where you're coming from. And I really like the fact that you presented how you and your mother, approached the situation. So it was very loving, and it's something that it kind of just helped me. And I took a shot of that moment, because I'm a mother, and I'm from Africa, from Nigeria, where those things are not, they're not acceptable. I mean, now they're probably working on it, people are coming out, but it's a place where you cannot speak of it. So you kind of just got me like ready for what if that moment, if I were to be in your mother's shoe, what would I do? So I have to say, and I have to admit that I took a shot of it just in case I had to use that line, because we have to learn to grow. And you definitely presented a picture that can help some of us to understand certain situations that we might not necessarily understand, but we have to like allow the time to go through the process, absorb it, and begin to, first of all, love and accept who that person is. So thank you very much. I really appreciate this presentation. I didn't think I was going to make it today, but when I saw the topic, I thought to myself, this is brand new for me. I've got to be in it. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you. And that's exactly like the humbleness, the interconnectedness, this idea that because I chose to give this presentation today, maybe a few years from now, a young person in Nigeria will have a positive reaction. And it's small, but it means a lot to me. So thank you.
All right. We have about 5 more minutes before we wrap up for today. Is there anybody else who'd like to say anything before we turn toward our closing? And we usually keep the room open for about 15-20 minutes if people want to stay around and connect. Any other comments, questions?
I have one. I think interconnectedness, humility, especially empathy, is something that we lack a lot, at least what I've seen in this world. What are some ways that you guys think we can up that and up the level?
Was the question, sorry, there was a little bit of a cutoff. So was the question around how can we make interconnectedness more of a reality or something we focus on? Missed the question.
Sorry, I didn't realize it cut off. Yeah, I think empathy is something that we lack a lot, at least what I've seen. Is there ways that you guys can suggest where we can up that in our communities or the people around us?
Anybody want to respond to that has a thought about that?
I have a thought. Hi everyone, I'm Teresa. Thank you, Tommy, so much. You actually mentioned, I loved your intro with humility. I thought the idea of not necessarily making yourself small, but recognizing that we, in the context of the world, are small. And I think that works within what Sarah's question was in terms of teaching ourselves empathy. It's recognizing who we are within this greater context of the world. And I think there's a quote, I'm going to misquote it, but there's a quote that's saying essentially, the more you travel, the smaller you become. And it's you recognizing all these different cultures and where your experience falls in interacting with people from different backgrounds and identities. And so I think right now is really difficult. We can't really travel, but participating actively in discussions like this, actively listening to other people's experiences and asking questions and learning about where people are coming from, whether it's just getting more diverse perspective, I think is really key to that interconnectedness. And you can't really be empathetic for someone unless you get to know them, right? So, yeah.
Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, I would add to, in listening, you're really giving someone the chance to tell their story. And when I say empathy, yes, you can definitely relate to the experience, but you will never have that experience. And so making sure you understand that fully as well. So I'm thinking right now, it's 2020, United States, there's so much attention on Black Lives Matter, and showing up, supporting that movement, being not only an ally, but really an accomplice to the work that needs to be done, the good trouble. But I will never try to speak for the African-American experience, because that's not my experience. So I think the one really important thing with empathy is not to take away the voice of other people. So to be a listener, and then to have conversations in your own circle. So great, I can show up all day for African-American community and for Black Lives Matter, but what am I doing when I'm at home on Thanksgiving with all my white relatives? What kind of conversations am I having then? And so I think it's, finding the place to have the conversation where you're going to be the most impactful and you're not taking away the voice from the person who's experiencing that.
That's great. All right. Mr. Ash, do you want to make any remarks before we kind of formally end today?
Oh, given the opportunity, have I ever said no to that?
It's your favorite thing.
Thank you, Tommy. You fulfill all expectations and enliven people's experiences. Few comments. In my teachings as a teacher of Sufism, and also as the principle behind legacy, I try to always bring the inner to the outer, and just to understand where the line is between our inner experience and our outer manifestation. You expressed yours beautifully today. This is, to me, extremely important. If you tell somebody to practice humility, or if I say to any of you, practice humility, how do you do that? It's not something you can easily practice. It's something that's a result of it's a result of something else, as you speak about empathy. And so I think that it begins with gratitude. I think that if we say practice gratitude, then we can relate to that. I'm sitting here at my desk looking out at the forest, and the trees don't compete with each other. If they happen to be growing exactly next to each other, they learn to intertwine their branches and their trunks together. There's no competition. The fact is that everything is indeed, from my point of view and my experience of all these years of meditation and outer work, everything is truly interconnected. Everything is, as we call isharat, everything is a hint to something greater. Everything is speaking of the same one truth. You talked about unity and diversity, and as you know, I like to also talk about diversity and unity, because to me, diversity and unity it's a little more subtle for the inner understanding of that process. You can go to the Christian teachings and understand where it says, "You change me, O Lord, and not my circumstance," or in Islamic teaching, you cannot change a community. So what does that boil down to? What it boils down to, from at least our perspective, or my Sufi perspective and Islamic perspective, and I think it's a universal perspective, which is to remember, to listen, but to remember. Whether you call it remembrance, you call it zikr, whether you repeat the name of God over and over again, whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, or whether you are remembering, the one important aspect is that you can't remember something that you never knew. And therefore, we have to go inside of ourselves deeply and to understand, what do I know and what I don't know. And even when you could, as you talked about today, even when you know that you don't know something, it's a state of knowledge. And so you know where to put your attention. Over the years in India, in the Middle East, living in a cave, in the civil rights movement, in all of the experiences, inner and outer. And it's something that I see you're carrying on, and I thank you very, very much for that, because, you know, when you get to be my age, it's nice to know that there are people who understand and are carrying on the work in their own way, in their own language, in their own circumstance, but it's obviously the same work. I began with discussion of Harold and Dr. Schweitzer. I'd like to end with another quote from Schweitzer. He said, "The more we act in accordance with the principle of reverence for life, the more we are gripped by the desire to preserve and benefit life. The principle of reverence for life includes an elemental sense of responsibility to which we must submit with all of our being. There are forces out there, social, a lot of that quote, but one I want to focus on at the very end is submission. Submission in Arabic, it comes from the same root as salam, peace, which comes from taslim, which means to be safe and secure. And so this concept of submitting to a higher authority, to God, to Allah, to the truth, to the universe, is so important. But it means how we act in the outer is that people should feel safe and secure in our hands. That's the most we can do. Whether we feel safe and secure in someone else's hands is a matter of listening and understanding. But people should feel safe and secure in our hands. And I know that a lot of people do feel that. I know the effect you've had on my own family. I know the effect you've had on Global Youth Village. And I hope that I live long enough to see more and more of that. Thank you so much.
Yes. Claps. Thank you, Tommy.
Your shoulders. I know I'm placing a heavy load on your shoulders, but that's fine. It's okay. And I hope you join our board of international advisors.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.
Yes, that was great. Thank you so much. So Jason, what's our next forum? And Teresa, we want to take that picture. Thanks for reminding me.
Yes,
Can we do
our
the
next.
Well, let's do the picture.
Yep, the next forum is on Thursday, August 27th. So the last Thursday, the fourth Thursday of the month. And our featured speaker will be Aklem Nazraoui. She is an Emerging Young Leaders Awardee, another program we did with the U.S. Department of State. She is going to be talking about countering violent extremism by investing in youth and partners, and really speaking about giving tips on building peace in vulnerable communities while engaging youth as partners. She has a whole list of honors which will be rolling out. She was just selected to be the top 100 most influential youth leaders in Africa last year. And she's been a great friend of Legacy. So she will be speaking on that topic in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
All right, Teresa, over to you.
Okay, before we wrap up, can we take a quick group photo of everyone? If you're able and comfortable with turning on your screen, we would love to see your beautiful faces. So I'll give you a second for everyone to turn on your cameras. Also, we have 2 screens, so I'm going to do 2 screenshots, and I'll give you all a countdown. Okay, let me move the chats. People are coming up. Great.
You never know what screenshot you're on, so smile the whole time.
Okay.
Smile
All right.
for both.
Looks like we've got plenty of people on our first screen, so I'm going to go ahead and give you our first countdown. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Next, round number 2. If you want to give us a peace sign, thumbs up, whatever. 3, 2, 1. Beautiful. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. For those of you who have to go, please feel free. And if anybody wants to stay and kind of introduce yourself and continue the conversation for about 15 minutes or so, feel free. This is the space for that. Thanks for coming.
All right, everyone. Have a blessed week. Bye-bye.
Hey, Stella. Bye.
All right.
Thanks, Tommy.
Bye.
All right.
You're in the dark, Alona. Oh.
All right, so if you want to chat or say anything or introduce yourself, feel free to unmute and go ahead. We got about there's. I see it as Cynthia, who's a good old friend of Tommy's there, and put some nice quotes in the chat. Thanks, Cynthia.
Yes, thank you.
Fatima, Zahra, where are you from?
I'm from Morocco. Sorry, I'm not alone. So I follow all the speech. Thank you, Tommy, for your inspiring story. Thank you for sharing too. You know, all of us have stories, have experience, and it's good to share sometimes our experience and to be inspired. It's very important for everyone to develop himself and to be developed in his career. So I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon in Morocco. I don't know how time in your
Earlier
country.
afternoon. Fatima is one of the current PFP fellows who started her own biogas company in Morocco. So she has a really cool startup that you'll all be finding out about.
Yes.
Oh, I want to know more about that. I want to know more about that. I want to introduce you to someone in Morocco who's working with us.
Okay. We work with the farmers. We are near to women here in rural countries, so we have a lot of things to say. So you can see our page in Instagram. We share sometimes our and YouTube also. We have some videos of what we do in the company. And I'm also active in an association, so I help young people to have some new knowledge to help themselves and gain money with a lot of businesses, small businesses in
And where are you?
with the